Welcome back to Wall Again, where passion meets music. If you're new to my channel, please hit that subscribe button. Oasis and Metallica are two very distinctive sounding bands and they sound completely different. But they're also two very divisive bands. So how can I listen to both bands? Well, I'm going to try and answer that question in this video. We'll start off with Oasis. They were formed in the early 1990s in Manchester, England. Of course, led by Liam Gallagher and his brother Noel, with Bonehead, Guigsy and Tony McCarroll on drums. They released their debut album, Definitely Maybe, in 1994, followed after in 1995 by What's the Story, Morning Glory, The Master Plan a few years later, and then Be Here Now. So that was really their stellar work, and they had a massive impact on me when I was growing up. They were the band in Ireland and the UK at the time. They were the biggest band around. They played guitars. I have to say they were a massive influence on me picking up a guitar. Particularly the song Don't Look Back in Anger. That was all over the radio. That video, very famous, of course. It was all over, well, it wasn't MTV, but whatever we had at the time. And I have to say, Noel playing those guitar solos, playing those guitar licks, absolutely fantastic, and had a massive impression on me as a young person, learning about rock music and learning about guitar. So Oasis were always there for me. But then as I got into, I suppose, more complicated guitar music, I was really drawn to Metallica, and particularly the complexity around their guitar sounds. So Metallica came from a completely different thing. Obviously they formed in Los Angeles in 1981 before moving up to San Francisco, and that was the hard lineup of James Hetfield on rhythm guitar, Lars Ulrich on drums, and then of course Kirk Hammett on lead guitar and Cliff Burton on bass. Cliff unfortunately passed away in 1986 in an accident when the tour bus flipped when the band were in Sweden, and he was replaced by Jason Newsted. The band continued on. They released And Justice for All in 1988, followed by the Black Album in 1991. So Metallica had a completely different approach to music to Oasis, and to be honest, I can appreciate both approaches. I think what drove me to listen to Metallica first was the complexity of the music, or what I deem to be complex music. Coming from listening to a lot of the albums from Oasis, and also listening to bands like Queen and the Beatles, they were all great rock bands, but when Metallica came along, there was just a deeper connection there because the music was so much better in my opinion, and the guitars were so much more accentuated and loud, and that's what really drew me into Metallica. But back then, when I was 16, 17, it was very unusual that anyone would like Metallica and Oasis. They were kind of two bands that didn't gel. Oasis were from the UK. They were, brash, and they really had that kind of an English aesthetic to them. Britpop, they were at the forefront of that whole movement. And their music, I suppose, their songs were good. I did like the first 3 albums and the Master Plan, which was the B-sides. I think they did have great music in there. But if you actually listen deeply, for me, a lot of the interesting things that were happening in Oasis were all around Noel's guitar. So essentially, his rhythm guitar playing, his chord structure, his arrangements, the types of chords he used. He wasn't afraid to throw in, add 9 chords, 7th chords, all these different elements, and add more than just like 4 or 5 chords in a verse. He might have 6, 7, 8. He was constantly trying to push the boundaries in terms of songwriting, and I think that's why Oasis were such a great band. They were very different from anything that was out at the time. I agree that they do sound like some of the previous bands from maybe the 1970s, like Slade and T-Rex, and even they borrowed from the Beatles. They probably borrowed a little bit of their image from the Stone Roses, but I have to say they did what they did better than anyone else, and Noel's rhythm guitar was a huge part of that. Also, Noel's lead guitar playing, I don't think gets enough credit. Sure, it is very simple, but you have to remember, in the mid-1990s, on the radio in Ireland and the UK, there wasn't a lot of guitar solos. A lot of the music was going into the more electronic elements. You had other bands then that were very poppy sounding, but the guitars weren't heavy, and there certainly wasn't any guitar solos. So with Oasis, what I found was they brought the guitar solo to the forefront again. On songs like Supersonic, fantastic guitar solo at the end of that. Okay, it's very simple. It's the same section repeated over and over again, but I still think it sounds really, really good, and it harks back to the 1970s in the sort of blues pentatonic Gibson Les Paul through a Marshall stack, that kind of a vibe. Another song that has a great guitar solo is Live Forever. Absolutely brilliant guitar solo, and that was another one that really pushed the band to the forefront, and that was one that made me see Oasis as a guitar band. But the guitar solo on Don't Look Back in Anger, I think, is head and shoulders above a lot of the other guitar solos that Noel has written, shall we say. It's absolutely fantastic. It really tells a story, and it's got some really, really tasty licks in there, and it flows. And that's the great thing about brilliant guitar solos. They have to be able to flow, and that one certainly does flow. So taking all that into account, that's really what drew me to Oasis. I was never a big fan of Liam as a singer. I always thought the drums with Oasis were very simple, overly simple, nearly like out of the way and in the background, a glorified drum machine or click track essentially. And I never liked that. I always thought a rock band should have drums really, really front and centre in the mix. So yeah, I just thought Oasis, Noel was the highlight for me, and that's the reason that drew me into listening to them, and I still listen to them to this day. With Metallica, it was something different. They obviously had two guitars in the forefront. They had rhythm guitar from James Hetfield, which was absolutely phenomenal. He's one of the best rhythm guitar players of all time, no doubt about that. And then you also had Kirk Hammett, and he's a great lead guitar player. Wouldn't be one of my favourite lead guitar players, but he's certainly up there with one of the best in the world. Like he's very accomplished at what he does, and I suppose he takes the approach of he mixes blues with shredding guitar, and I think he's able to pick the right parts for the right songs. Some of his standout guitar solos, obviously the solo from One is fantastic. The outro solo from Fade to Black is fantastic as well. And then the solo from The Unforgiven on the Black album. I really like that one. You can see where I'm going with this. When Kirk Hammett's shredding, to me it's a little bit blasé. There's better shredders than Kirk Hammett, and I don't think he's the best at shredding. But when it comes to the bluesy guitar playing, I think he's much, much better. And when he mixes blues with speed, I think that's where he really comes into his own. So that was really great for me, Metallica. Another thing that Metallica had to draw me in was the harmony guitars. So on songs like Master of Puppets, where there's harmony, dual harmony guitars in that song, particularly in the middle section. Now, James Hetfield actually recorded all of those guitars, but when they're playing it live, Kirk plays the live parts with James, and when they're in harmony and in sync, it sounds absolutely amazing. So for me, that was another level of complexity that I didn't have when I heard Oasis stuff. I didn't hear that, but when I heard the Metallica stuff, that was something that was a step up again, and that was a reason that really drew me into the band. And then I suppose on bass, well, they had two fantastic bass players throughout, the 80s and 90s. They had Cliff Burton, of course, who was a fingerstyle picking bassist. Great lines, great riffs. He even had bass solos in some of those songs. Absolutely brilliant. And then he was replaced, of course, by Jason Newsted, who I think was another phenomenal bass player. Jason played with a pick. Again, a totally different style, but brilliant. Absolutely served the songs perfectly well, and I think Metallica were a great unit as musicians. They were a great outfit. It was rounded off, of course, by Lars Ulrich on drums. Now, I think the drum sound on the Black Album is one of the best drum sounds of all time. Okay, we all know he didn't record it in one take. It was all recorded in sections and stitched together by the engineers. But still, the drums sound amazing. But going back to the 1980s, the work from Lars Ulrich is brilliant, I think. And it really complements the guitar playing by James Hetfield. Okay, he's no Dave Lombardo, but he's still a great drummer, or he was a great drummer in the 1980s, should I say. And I think he really propelled that band, and he had a big personality as well. So yeah, just let's maybe talk about reasons why these bands are divisive. So Oasis are divisive because they are so brash and out there. They've said many times that they think they're the best band in the world or the best band of all time. They have no problem falling out with people, especially other bands. They didn't have much time for Blur, and there was a whole Blur v Oasis thing in the 1990s, which I won't get into here. Maybe save that for another video. But I think, yeah, Oasis were the kind of band that got on people's nerves, and I think they were a little bit like Marmite. You either love them or you hate them. And I loved their music, but maybe I didn't so much like the attitude or the things that they said. They probably could have been a bit more humble. But in saying that, I think the media loved the fact that they were constantly controversial, and there was always something to write about this band. and that was a great thing for getting them promoted. So, you know, you do what you got to do. I think like a lot of rock fans, classic rock fans, don't really like Oasis. A lot of people call them mock rock. They don't think they're the real deal. They don't think they shine or hold a candle to bands from the 1970s that were doing it, like even like T-Rex or The Who, or certainly the Beatles. There's a lot of people don't think that Oasis hold a candle to those bands. Personally, I think they have their place in sort of the Rock Hall of Fame. But I think when you're comparing things, you can't be too quick to dive in. And I think if you look at Oasis's back catalogue, and you look at the songs that I spoke about earlier, then you look at some of the elements like the seventh chords and the add 9 chords that Noel uses, the song structures, the songwriting. If you look at those elements, I think there's a lot to see in Oasis that's really, really good, but I can understand why people don't like them. In terms of Metallica, they were very similar to Oasis in terms of being like Marmite. People either loved them or hated them. A lot of metal fans felt that they just really sold out when the Black Album was released. But that probably wasn't even the worst. It was in the 1990s when they really started, you know, getting into more like pop icons as opposed to heavy metalers. They cut their hair. They did a lot more music videos for Load and Reload, and throughout the late 1990s, they were constantly making videos. They were wearing eyeliner. It was really trying to be cool and trying to be with it at the time. And I think a lot of that really upset the hardcore metal fans. I think a lot of them turned their back on them at that stage. And that's why they're kind of considered one of those bands that you either love them or you hate them. But I think Oasis and Metallica are very similar in that vein. And that's why people will either love or hate them. But why would someone maybe love Oasis and hate Metallica, or vice versa? I'll try and answer that question. So I think Oasis are music that was made for people, certainly people from Ireland and the UK in the mid-1990s, who were maybe not massive rock fans. Maybe they weren't into rock. They were maybe not musicians, and I think they were heavily, you know, into Oasis because it was something that was simple. The songs were easy enough to get into your head. Even though I spoke earlier about the songs being complex, I think they were easy enough to digest for like mainstream media or mainstream music fans, should I say. And I think that's why Oasis were so popular. I think that it was just that they had the hooks, they had the great songs and choruses and melodies, and people were able to latch on to that. But certainly a lot of people that are big Oasis fans, they wouldn't like Metallica because Metallica are a heavy metal band, and they would have just seen that as maybe American and the opposite of what Oasis are. And I can totally get that. When we flip to the other side then, why Metallica fans wouldn't necessarily like Oasis, a lot of the reasons people like Metallica is because maybe they're musicians, or maybe they've picked up instruments and tried to play some of these songs and realised how hard they actually are to pull off. But I think people were driven as well by Metallica's heaviness. You know, they were a metal band. They were from America. It was a different vibe to what Oasis were doing. And again, let me say, Metallica were in your face, and some people think Lars and James can be very annoying the way Noel and Liam can. Very outspoken. But I think heavy metalers, a lot of them still doubled down on Metallica and saw Metallica as the Beatles of heavy metal. But if you're into heavy metal, and heavy metal is the only music you listen to, I can understand why you wouldn't like Oasis. So I can understand why most people are going to like one band or the other. There's very few that actually like both bands. But I'm one of those few. And I have to say, when I started listening to Oasis, I really liked them. Then I moved on to Metallica. I didn't like Oasis so much, and I was a Metallica fan for years. And then in the last few years, I have to say, I've really gotten back into Oasis again. And the reason for that is I was watching a video by Rick Beato, who I have great respect for. And he was, you know, running through all the different songs, what makes this song great. He had done Metallica songs and Blink-182 and Korn and Rush, and I think he'd done Led Zeppelin and the Beatles. He had done an awful lot of songs. And I thought this was a fantastic episode. And then he did some Oasis songs. And I was thinking, Jesus, this is mad. I didn't think Oasis had this layer of complexity in their music. But he was able to break it down and show the level of complexity. And then as well, Rick can be very positive. He's not very negative on his channel. He's constantly positive. And I think that inspired me. The fact that he was looking for the good in everything, and he was looking for the good in Oasis. It gave me a renewed sense of appreciation for Oasis music. And then I suppose I've been listening to Oasis, and now they've actually reformed. They're playing a gig in Croke Park in Dublin in the summer. Lucky enough to have a ticket for that. And I have to say that I've really started liking Oasis again. So between Metallica and Oasis, I actually listen to both of these bands quite regularly at the moment, and I really like both of them, and for different reasons, as I said, but I think it is possible to like both of these bands. So there you go, a little bit of a different video from me, maybe a little bit rambly, but let me know in the comments if you like Metallica, or you like Oasis, or you like both, or you like neither. I would love to hear from you. If you liked the video, give the like button and I'll press there, and I will talk to you on the next one. Bye for now.